Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session in our Interstellar Insight series, celebrating the global launch of my new book, What Space Got to Do with It? An Interstellar Guide to Success. This book is more than a continuation, it's a call to activate the potential we all carry. While the first volume introduced 10 life lessons for personal growth, this second book shifts from reflecting into implementation. It distills over 35 years of experience in the global space ecosystem and draws on conversations with over 200 thought leaders who are shaping the future on Earth and beyond. An Interstellar Guide to Success translates space principles like systems thinking, visionary leadership, and strategic collaboration into real world strategies that entrepreneurs, educators, policymakers, and emerging leaders. It's built on four essential pillars: leadership, awareness, access, and action. Each one is key to creating momentum in a fast changing world. Today's session is titled From Stories to Systems: How Awareness and Access Shape the Future. We'll explore how storytelling sparks imagination, how role models expand what's possible, and how purpose built pathways create opportunities for people everywhere to rise. Our featured guests come from different sectors and backgrounds, but they share a common thread. They're catalysts. They lead with integrity, they lift others as they rise, and they transform insights into action. I hope you'll enjoy today's conversation. So let's jump in. It's my honor to welcome Rod Pyle, an acclaimed space historian, award winning author, and editor in chief of Ad Astra, the flagship publication of the National Space Society. Rod, thank you for joining us today. You're in chapter 3, which is about awareness, the power of storytelling. Your storytelling has shaped how the world understands space, and your voice continues to spark imagination, curiosity, and impact. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. This all sounds pretty good. Now, is this where you'd like me to talk about myself a little bit?
Please do share a little bit
Okay.
about your background.
Thanks for the invitation and congratulations on the book, by the way. Increasingly, I found authoring to be probably the best way to move from a six-figure income to a five-figure one, but it's exciting and it's very satisfying once you've got your book out. So personally, I was a child of the space age. I'm the oldest person in the room here by a fair amount, I think, and that was a very special time. I mean, I was able to watch these incredible missions of exploration of the Apollo program go thundering off to the moon as often as every 10 weeks, which is just kind of unthinkable in today's world, although I hope we're heading back to that. And after I got out of college, I made TV commercials and then educational films for about 15 years. And some of the educational films are on science topics, but I really wanted to reach back and tell that story because that was something that had really so enraptured me as a young person. So I spent some time making documentaries for the History Channel, a few of them space documentaries, although back in that time, space that channel was more about World War II than it was about space, but we did both. And then in the early 90s, I became interested in writing TV scripts. And then finally, in the early 2000s, was able to start writing books for a living. So since then, I've written about 20. And I've been the editor-in-chief of the National Space Society's print quarterly Ad Astra, as you mentioned, since 2017, which is really, writing books is great because very unlike television, you don't get network notes. They give you a subject and they say, okay, we'll see you in a year. And you go off and you write your book and, you get some notes, maybe some pushback, a little slapping around by the developmental editors. But overall, it's a really fun and pleasant process and just allows you to really utilize the best of yourself. But I think my favorite gig started in the about 2014. I started writing an annual book for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory with the whimsical title of Technology Highlights. But we'd basically take 30 of the coolest projects that were happening at JPL in that year and write them up with a lot of photographs, so very graphically driven. And it was a real exercise in converting what was often rather complex projects and rather dry prose into something that was a compelling 500 word or less narrative. The idea being to engage the public in what JPL was doing, but more critically, members of Congress. So I like to think because these were sent to all those members of Congress that we provided some compelling reading, at least for their aides on their bio breaks, if not for the Congress people themselves. Um, but as I was pointing out, what I really enjoyed about it was a lesson for me in how to convert this highly technical material, and usually lots of it, because when you're talking to somebody who's been working on a project for 10 years, you don't want to say, okay, I got 5 minutes to get 500 words, go. You talk to them for an hour or so, and then really figure out how to distill that from something that's kind of dry to something that's going to engage people emotionally and touch their hearts. And so that really has, I think, been the high point of all this.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it has been a wonderful opportunity being an author and getting to share all of your stories in this next book. So I'm really excited about that. And one of those amazing stories is Meredith Garofalo. She's a regional Edward R. Murrow award-winning meteorologist, founder of Rocket Girl Enterprise, and a nationally recognized science communicator. She's featured in Chapter 4, which is about awareness, the power of role models. Meredith, thank you for being with us. Your authenticity and advocacy continue to highlight the path for the next generation of change makers. We'd love to hear a little bit about your journey as well.
Well, thank you so much, Shelly. I'm so happy to be here today and to share my story and also hear about all the other great stories that are going to be part of your book. I wanted to be a meteorologist when I was 3 years old, and for some reason, it just stuck with me for my life. My mom told me the story of surviving a tornado outbreak, and so I went to school. I got my Bachelor of Science, and as you can tell, I'm very shy. And so going into the public eye and becoming a broadcast meteorologist just seemed a perfect fit. But after doing it for a while, I kind of got bitten by the space bug in 2017, and I was covering my first story actually in 2016 that was about NOAA's GOES, our satellite program. And I covered that after the first launch, the local meteorologist. I was working at the the ABC and Fox stations in Santa Barbara, California. So I got to go down to the NWS office, National Weather Service office, and talk to the meteorologists about how the satellite data was just changing the way they forecast and how they were so excited because the next one was going to be covering the Western Hemisphere and really start to pick up on these systems that are coming in off the Pacific. And I had the opportunity to tell their story. And I remember getting feedback from my bosses that, wow, like you're bringing space into this. That's really cool. We didn't know that. And I didn't realize that either. So then I next got to go cover an assignment out at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Again, I talked to the meteorologist, that was in my wheelhouse, and they told me about how they were the ones who could give the go for a launch. And I realized as a science communicator, there was not enough that was happening with storytelling with the space community. And after covering my first launch the next year and doing some exclusive reporting on it, I decided that I was going to be the one to go out there and do that. And my first launch was where the Rocket Girl came from. My agent, after I covered it, was like, you're just that Rocket Girl, aren't you? So that's kind of where I named my company from. But I've spent almost 17 years now in television, and I got out for a little bit after my dad died. And that's when I started my own LLC and decided I wanted to do a lot more writing and science communicating, but also helping space companies when it came to media and broadcasting things and whatnot that they needed help with. And so I have the best of both worlds now, being a broadcast meteorologist in Columbus, Ohio, a space and STEM journalist for the station, but I also still have my company, so I can still help inspire young women all over to love STEM and space, and our next generations tell them that anything's possible, just like my story.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have, although you're in the chapter on role models, we do have a chapter number 5, which talks about those space entrepreneurs. So thank you for sharing that. And I think everybody on, even though you're all science communicators, I know you're also all entrepreneurs as well, which leads me into our next amazing global thought leader, Dr. Graham Lowell, an internationally respected astrobiologist, science communicator, and director of communications at Blue Marble Space. He's featured in Chapter 7, which is about access, unlocking potential through purpose-built pathways. Graham, thank you for joining us today. Your dedication to expanding access, fostering community, and leading with empathy is truly inspiring. We'd love to hear a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love the idea of a purpose-built pathway, finding our way there. When I was a young person, I loved like reading Carl Sagan's works. I imagined myself maybe one day being like an esteemed professor of astronomy or space science, and I loved Patrick Stewart's monologues as Captain Picard in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I thought of myself as maybe one day being able to inspire other people in that way. But sometimes along the pathway, we lose ourselves. There are setbacks, there are ups and downs, changes in the plan. And I certainly had that in my own life. There was a period where I was a teenage father and a high school dropout and a junkie. And it took a lot of work to find my way back into the path that I thought I had envisioned. But even then, I've realized throughout my career that you're never stuck in one track or pathway that somebody else has followed. You have to find your own way. And sometimes that requires finding a way to break through gates in front of you. There are gatekeepers out there, like it or not. And some of those people, we need to find ways through those gates they're trying to hold closed. And so, if anything, if you can find people out there in the world who can be a voice for you and help you find your own voice, that can help you when you have a purpose to find your own pathway, to break through those gates, to build a career that is meaningful for you and that has purpose. I'm very fortunate now in my life that I do get to interact with so many young people from around the world who want to be involved in astrobiology and cosmology and space philosophy and space psychology and these various realms that I'm attached to. And it's so inspiring for me to see their enthusiasm and their passion and their willingness to put the work in, but also knowing that I can be someone who can help kick open a few gates along the way is pretty crucial.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. So, we have quite a diverse group of our science communicators with a wide variety of backgrounds. So, our next section of the webinar, we're going to kind of look at some themed questions. And our first themed question is about storytelling as a leadership tool. So, Rod, your chapter reminds us that storytelling is more than communication, it's how we shape culture, inspire possibilities. How do you use storytelling as a leadership tool to engage others and spark momentum?
Well, I've tried it a few different times in a few different ways with varying degrees of success. But I think early on when I started writing about the Apollo program, that would have been about 2004, and also when I was doing those History Channel shows, I had a chance to interview people like Gene Kranz and some of the Apollo astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, Charlie Duke, Jerry Griffin, who was the flight director. And between that and the research I was doing for the books, I was really just left goggle-eyed by the incredible leadership that was happening during that era, which is not to say that NASA doesn't have incredible leaders in various parts of its organization now. But at the time, it was a new organization. The funding was coming fast and furious, and they were on this countdown clock to get human beings to the moon before the end of the decade. And it was just amazing to see how that machine worked because nothing had really been done like this before. The Manhattan Project, maybe, and a few other things prior to that. But this was a new thing in a technological age. And I'm currently working on a biography of one of the flight directors in that era. And we were talking a few months ago, and we were both sort of chuckling because we matched our feelings in as we look back on this crazy notion to send people to the moon with what was basically 1950s technology just entering the 1960s, that it worked and that they didn't lose anybody and that it worked really brilliantly. So I guess the next step was in 2009, I was engaged by a group called the Conference Board in New York and the Johnson Space Center to create an executive education program based on the Apollo years. And during the first 2 years, we hosted about a dozen groups of C-suite executives. And it was one of those experiential learning things. So that same company would take people to Gettysburg and walk them through the weeds in the fields and say, if Pickett had charged just moments earlier, that could have changed the entire course of the war. And business is like war. And I never really quite got all those connections that they were doing, but it was a little easier, I think, to do it at the Johnson Space Center because we'd sit in mission control. And I got to sit in Gene Kranz's chair. And back then, you could take down the red ropes and actually go up and use it. So we were showing Apollo 13 on the screen. And it became clear pretty quickly that a lot of the people in this group, and some of them were close in age to me, didn't know very much about the moon program. They didn't know very much about the American space program in general, but especially about the moon landings, other than the fact that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first two guys on the moon and so forth. And they were really inspired by the storytelling uh, and the leadership tales woven into it. So we weren't lecturing on this is how you become a leader. We were talking about how it was done then, the power of that kind of leadership, the inspiration of some of those leaders, the big people like Kranz and Gilruth and Chris Kraft and so forth, and the net result of that being this amazing national achievement. So really, although I've been writing books for a number of years before that, I think that was the moment where it sort of arrived in my head how you can really inspire people with great storytelling. And I wrote a book shortly after that about innovation through NASA, which really kind of brought all that together for me. And I've been doing that ever since, and it's really fun.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Meredith, you often share your personal story publicly from overcoming bullying to becoming a science communicator. How has being open about your journey helped others? And what has it taught you about being a leader?
That's a great question, Shelly. I think nowadays people sometimes feel like they don't have other people that might be going through something similar as them, or they hear stories, but they look at these people who went through something like bullying and they can't relate to them. And I've learned through my storytelling that sometimes you just have to really be authentic and you have to really open up to people and sometimes get vulnerable and say, hey, you know what? I'm not afraid to share my story with you because you know what? There's a reason that this happened to me and I went through this. And now I get to tell that story to people and let you know that it's okay and that you can always overcome adversity if you put your mind to it and if you never give up on yourself. And I think I've learned from people by, getting to a place where I can publicly say, hey, I was bullied. I went through verbal and emotional abuse. I was fired from jobs. I had coworkers and bosses that were not good to me and that held me back from certain parts of my life. But at the end of the day, it's all about the journey. And it was all part of that journey to get to me where I am today, even the negative things that happened. And just get the feedback from people that are like, wow, you might be somebody we watch on the news or we see that does writes these stories for publications and you're just like everybody else. And I always like to say, I have a job just like everyone else. The difference is I'm seen by millions of people every day. I try to bring it down to the level to say I'm no different than the person sitting next to me or any of us. We're all here for our own individual purposes and reasons. And I think by being able to stand up and to share those stories, to be vulnerable, it shows strength. And I think as a leader, you have to have strength and you have to have enough courage to say what you're thinking, but also to share those parts of you that aren't perfect and show other people that in order to be perfect, there are so many perfections that or imperfections that actually go into that. And so, I try to do it when it's, relates to the situation. So if I'm talking about a career story, I'm not afraid to share my struggles and how I was failing math and how I struggled to keep a 3.0 GPA because I just wasn't good at some of the math and science. But when it came to communicating, I'm a great writer and I'm really passionate about that part of the process and that sometimes you don't have to be the best at everything to succeed in what you're good at. And so I just try to find those things to let people know that it's okay if you're not succeeding in an area that you want to, because there's other areas you can still succeed to, at the end of the day, win at what you're doing and also make a difference in other people's lives. And I just hope that God bless me with this story that I'm telling every day of my own life. And I'm hoping that at least one person hears part of it and can have that little bit of motivation they need to go forward. And that's when I deep down feel like I'm taking on that leadership role and using my talents and my stories to make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now we're going to pivot into our next theme of questions, which is about from awareness to advocacy. So, Meredith, I'm going to come back to you because you're in chapter 4, which explores how role models help us reimagine what's possible. Can you share a moment when someone else's visibility empowered you and how you now try to pass that on to others?
Absolutely. I immediately go every time when everyone asks me, who's your role model in your life? And I have to go back to, I think it was my freshman or sophomore year in college. And I went to one of the student conferences for the American Meteorological Society. or it was the National Weather Association. I can't remember which one, but it was a conference that was hosted to get students excited about weather. And I met Rich Apuzzo. He was a fellow graduate of Valparaiso University, and he was also a broadcast meteorologist in the Cincinnati market. And being an Ohio girl, and he was an Ohio guy, we just connected right away. But what was special about him was not only did he know me when I was a college student and I was just finding myself and studying and getting ready to go out into the real world, he was there for me when I started off in the real world. And after I went through a bad experience at my first job, not being able to hold it for a couple of months because I made a stupid mistake that, I learned from, he didn't give up on me. Instead, he came back to me and said, Meredith, you know what? In the television business, you're nobody unless you get fired at least once. And there was something that I still smile about this day because here I am, like fresh out of college, a few months into my job, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? But that motivated me to learn. I mean, I'll just be honest, like I accidentally said a swear word and it went over a high school basketball game, didn't know I was being recorded. A simple mistake, but that cost me my job at that time of my life. But Rich never gave up. Instead, he took that leadership role to coach me and to help nurture me and say, you know what, you made a mistake. As long as you learn from this and you move forward, you're never going to make a mistake again. And just know the microphone is always on, which now I do. But I go fast forward into my career when I was dealing with people at work that were trying to hold me back and, was losing some confidence. When you get into those 20s, that first 5 to 6 years of your career, you just kind of sit back and you don't know if you can do what you're meant to do. And he always was that beacon of light. And it didn't matter how busy Rich was. He could pick up the phone and text me or call me back and say, hey, I'm in the middle of something now, but I will make time for you tonight. What time works for you? And to have a mentor that was there for me like that, even at my worst, but also to celebrate some of my best when I was getting a new job or I had a victory with a story that I was telling and it got published or it was getting national attention. And here I was in a small television market just starting off. He was my biggest cheerleader, but he was also a coach. And he was also a friend in addition to being a mentor. And I think that is everything you need to be when you're a leader. You have to accept people and never judge and understand, that you were once in their shoes. And I think Rich saw a lot of myself, in him when he was just getting out of college and starting off. And there's something comforting about that. And when you're a good leader, when you're a good mentor, you're bringing comfort, you're bringing nurturing, you're bringing compassion. And he had all of that. And to this day, unfortunately, we lost him to brain cancer a while back. But to this day, he is still the person that is my shining light. And every time I have a success, I look up and I'm like, thanks, Rich. I hope you saw that.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story and the power of mentorship, which brings me to Graham. You've mentored young scientists around the world. How does awareness of opportunities of one's own worth unlock that long-term success?
Yeah, I think worth is the most important thing there. We can't really begin to feel a worth and a compassion for others until we really value ourselves. And these realms of psychology and studying things like hopelessness and helplessness, a lot of that stems oftentimes from a person's own feeling like everything's their fault, that they can't get ahead, they're the cause of everything bad in their lives, there's no value in who and what they are. And a lot of people who fall into various realms of despair and are unfortunately bound into realms of mental health issues have that feeling like they lack their own worth, they don't understand it. It's one reason I value meditation so much in my own life, in my own practice, is it gives me a chance to stop my hyperactive mind and step back for a moment, take a little break in between when something bad happens, and before I start trying to assign blame to myself, just to have a moment to say, this just happened in the world. Here's how I can react to it if I choose to. And I think it's important when people are looking for worth in themselves and to find hope and to find a feeling of helpfulness so they can give more to themselves and others, is to start from that place of not blaming themselves when things feel wrong, but also then looking for ways ahead, ways to make things matter, to find opportunity to build their future moving forward. There are a lot of us out here in the world who love to put our hands out and grab on and pull you forward, but you do have to know how to look for those people and use your own voice to find us. And so it's really always just so humbling for me to see so many young people around the world who are doing this now, who are reaching out. And I probably spend several hours every week answering emails and DMs and various social media channels and stuff from young people from around the world who want to be involved in these kinds of careers. And I hope for anyone out there who feels like, oh, I shouldn't contact that person, they'll never write back. Just know that there are a lot of us who do our best to write back when we can, as often as we can. And we are willing to open those opportunities if we have them available for you. And so, when you're looking for your own worth, just know that you are worthy. And I often tell people like everyone can be an astrobiologist. Everyone can be involved in cosmology and philosophy and psychology in these various realms. Everyone can be involved in some way. Even if you don't have a PhD or an MD or a BA or a BS or an MS or whatever, it's not bound by the titles you have on paper. It's bound by your enthusiasm and willingness to put yourself out there and do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That now leads us into our next theme questions, which is about designing systems that empower. And so, Graham, I'm going to come back to you. You're in chapter 7, which highlights how structured access from fellowships to mentorships can change lives. You've already started sharing that. What principles do you apply when building programs that last and uplift?
Well, I'll speak primarily to the Young Scientist program at the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science, since I'm the director of that program and I've been involved with it for many years now. I did not originally create that program, I will say. I really do owe a lot of love and respect for those who built it, like Dr. Sanjoy Sam, Dr. Jacob Hock Misra, all of my colleagues at Blue Marble Space, as well as all of the mentors who've been part of this program over the years. Our program is unique in a few ways in that we have an online remote open access internship for college students or those who finished an undergraduate degree but haven't done graduate school yet. It gives them a chance to join our institution to not only work on research or some kind of project that a mentor has available, but the students also learn about science communication from myself and others. And they also learn about moral philosophy. They explore various ethical frameworks we've used through time to answer the questions of our lives and our culture and in science. And so there are a lot of scientific questions that really matter to society. And so using ethical frameworks, finding ways to figure out like, should we do this? Ought we to do this? Where is the value in what we choose to do as human beings is very important too. And so in our program, we're basically building, global citizen scientists, people who aren't only thinking of the research, but also maybe think a bit more about the ethical questions of the research, as well as how to then share and present the research. And so it's been a very fun program to be part of. We've had over 500 people now have taken part in this program since 2014. Currently, this summer, we've had 46 interns from 16 nations around the planet. We often can bring in students from nations who often don't have access really to other internships or opportunities available for various students in certain countries. And so for me, it's been fun seeing this and thinking of how to best support the students. Often it comes from communication, from a sense of openness to hear when they have issues. For a lot of our students around the world, there can be issues with work and life and classes and family. During the pandemic, of course, we had issues with health very often. And so being open to hearing how the students are feeling, what they're going through, helps us then to administer a program that helps support them in their own endeavors.
Excellent. Thank you. And it's a wonderful program. I was fortunate to get to join you this year as one of the mentors. And I love that it's global and open to everyone. So thank you. Rod, your storytelling has made space history and policy accessible to millions. How can we design storytelling ecosystems that invite more people in and make them feel like they belong?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's one that's come up frequently because having grown up watching NASA do what they do, one of their shortcomings over the years has, I think it's fair to say, been their ability to really shape a story. They've had trouble fully engaging the public with the amazing things that they do. And it's interesting, if you look at the polls from Pew and Gallup and the other organizations, literally from the beginning of the 1960s forward, from the point that they started polling about the space program, you do see variances during the announcement of the Apollo program. The interest was kind of high because NASA was new and this was this new amazing thing that President Kennedy wanted to do. And then it started to dip down as we got to the mid 60s, and it was taking a little longer than people wanted. And then, of course, the first lunar landing comes, and boom, the ratings are up. And this continues over the decades. But the fascinating thing to me is it depends on, of course, how you structure the questions and what you're asking. So if you're saying, should America lead in space? Yeah, we always get 50, 60, 65%. But then you ask, then or now, is it important that America be the first or the next power to put boots on the moon? And that comes down to 20 or maybe even 15, 16, 17%. So clearly there's a story here that's not being fully told. So in this context, and I work with a lot of people in terms of public speaking and especially writing articles. And the one thing I try to get across is, storytelling is really everything. And it's not just getting the facts across, it's more emotionally based than that. If we've anybody who's seen the movie Casablanca from the old days understands that even though that movie was an absolute train wreck in its production, it magically came together at the end because it touched people emotionally. So when I'm talking to either other science writers or just regular folks, the one thing I try to get across is, and it doesn't matter whether it's written articles, writing a book, doing social media texts, or live lectures, and even in technical presentations to an extent, there's enormous power in speaking to the heart. And if you do this, the mind will always follow. If you do it the other way around, that's not always the case. And for me, this has been the most important tool I've discovered in my speaking or writing. Speaking to the brain first is fine for imparting information if you're doing a technical discussion to other people who are your peers. But when you're talking to a more generalized audience, it doesn't create the emotional bond and connection that a story does. Now, it's clear I have an author's bias because this is what we do, and this is what we try to make our living on. But when you look back across the ages, back to the Greek playwrights, back to religious leaders, compelling storytelling was always at the core of what they did because it worked. And I'm pretty sure if we could go all the way back to ancient times to sit down with Og the caveman, as he gathered his tribe around, talk about the great hunt, he didn't start off by counting how many gazelles he brought down that quarter. He started off by telling a story about the great hunt and getting people really engaged and excited, and then either gave them the good or bad news, which was softened by the fact that he made this emotional connection. So for me, that really is the story, the core of storytelling and passing that information along in a way that brings people with you.
Excellent. I think that's really important that we've got to bring people with us. And that's not only in space, but in many other disciplines. How do we include more people and make it inclusive? Which brings me to our next themed question, which is about trust, belonging, and the power of community. Meredith, you've built trusted relationships with your audience and mentees across platforms. What does it take to cultivate real trust, especially in a multimedia saturated world?
I think the thing that always comes to my mind is you have to be authentic. You have to be yourself. You can't go out there and try to be someone else or like someone else because let's admit it, sometimes we see somebody else that we feel might be more successful than us or doing something that's getting more attention and we want to be like them. But if that's not who we are and we're not true to ourselves, people can pick up on that. And so I think we just have to make sure that when we are going out there and we're trying to gain that trust. For example, I've interviewed some of the biggest, heads of companies from across the country. I mean, I've interviewed people at Voyager Space, at NASA, Sierra Space. I've done stories with SpaceX, Blue Origin. And, every time that I've sat down with people from these companies, especially in the higher ups, there's always that, well, can we trust the media? That's a problem that we have seen, unfortunately, these days, because there are a lot of people that will go out there to get the story, no matter what it takes, and they cross ethical bounds just to be the one to report that story, even if it's not with the appreciation or the somebody saying, yeah, I'm going to give you this story. And the next thing you know, you lose that trust. And so I always go to my interviews and say, hey, here's my background, here's stuff I've done. You can talk to other people I've interviewed in the business, but I'm just here to report the facts. I'm here to get the information, not take a side, and I want to make sure the story is told exactly as it needs to be told without meddling it or trying to spin it left or right. And that's always how I've been. That's what I was taught when I started to learn about journalism and all the 101s that came with that. And I've also been open with the people I'm interviewing with. Maybe take that time before to do some extra research on him or her and find out, their history, or if there's anything that we have in common, or if there's someone that we both know, that anything I can do to make them comfortable talking with me. And if they need questions in advance, I'm always happy to provide that. But I think it's all about transparency too, because you have to have somebody see what you're seeing and have them see you back and be able to be comfortable enough to sit down and open up to you. And I try to listen to when I'm asking the questions to find something that I can take it to a deeper level based on what I know about them or what they've told me before. And I always finish up with any story that I write is I send them a copy, or if there's any questions that I have before I publish it, I reach out to them and say, hey, you know what? You get a great interview, but this one question or this one section is just not, I don't think I understand it correctly. Here's what I'm thinking. I'll send them a couple or a couple sentences and say, I just want to make sure I'm telling the story right. And I think that in the end has gained that extra trust by being my authentic self, being open and honest, and also being transparent with everything that I do.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Great insight on that importance of authenticity because people know when you're not being authentic. They can see through that right away. Now, Graham, your work with the Young Science Program crosses borders and belief systems. How do you build a sense of belonging in such a global, diverse environment?
Yeah, it's important. I think, our tendencies that evolved with us, make us feel very competitive. Competition is great. It gives us challenge. It makes us want to strive for more. But I think competition also has been a problem for us in our history as well, from our ancestral heritage. It's very easy to be angry at someone or to judge them for their differences because it starts from a place of self-protection. I don't have to trust the other. I can distance myself from them. And early on, for tribalist, viewpoints, like it allowed us to protect not just the self, but the community, the small in group, protect us from the others out there. But when we view competition in that kind of light, we can see that it leads to some problems too. We start highlighting our differences as a bad thing, as a negative, something to critique and use as a tool of weaponry and warfare and hate in this world. And that just doesn't bring value to our civilization. It never has. It's always been a problem for us. And you look back through history shows that those kinds of viewpoints lead to very tragic consequences. But when we view competition in a more powerful way, as a way of us, challenging ourselves, challenging our communities, our groups that we work with to be better and to do better, we can really find more value in our differences. All of us humans on the planet, we share so much more in the similarities that we have than our differences. We are all part of a 13.8 billion year lineage of existence from the earliest formation of the earliest atoms of hydrogen inside of our bodies right now to the formation of our solar system and our planet, the origins of life, the evolution of a life in our planet over billions of years. This little window of time that we have that in our own observation, our own existence of being aware of this all is just, a blink of an eye in the scales of the cosmos. And so if we can find a way to use competition favorably and for good for each other, we can find belonging, we can find empathy for each other. And those things really matter. I think for the Young Scientist program, but for any kind of human endeavor, we really should be using challenge and competition to our own benefit, but also for the benefit of other people. To find out that in the end, there's various levels of community that we have. We have ourselves, our immediate families, our extended families, our local region that we live in on the planet, our nations. But at the end of the day, our grandest scale of community is us in the cosmos together as humanity on this one little rock in space. And so I think when you help people to try to frame their viewpoints of these different levels of what community they are involved in, and they can realize that in the end, we're all in this together, I think that really does have a lot of power and it can provide a lot of help for people to find that empathy.
Fantastic. And I know for the group that I mentored this year for the Young Science Program, we had someone from Ghana, Ecuador, and Pakistan. So we had quite a diversity across the planet there. And we're all on this great starship called Earth. Well, we're coming into our final question. And this is going to be where we kind of ask each of you to share one message or insight you hope our audience carries with them. Maybe it's about leadership or purpose or about the future of space and society. So, Rod, we'd like to start with your closing thoughts for our audience.
Well, in keeping with what we've already talked about, we're really in a changing environment for storytelling, to put it mildly. When I was young, again, watching what was happening during the Apollo program years, there were three TV networks in the United States, national ones. There were maybe five radio networks. And of course, the newspapers handled everything in print as far as news was concerned. And obviously, that's changed a lot. We now have more conduits than anybody could have even imagined then. Um, and at the same time, we're catering to an audience that, as you go further down in age, has, at least according to the research, increasingly short attention spans, not because of any deficiency on their end, but because they are slammed with so much media noise. It's just incredible. So, on the book side, for instance, and I probably shouldn't be saying this when we're talking about a book rollout, but as recently cited by the Authors Guild, which is a really great organization in terms of helping authors get their work done and their words out, more books are currently published each year than were published in the entirety of the 20th century. I'll let that soak in for a moment. And that number was taken before AI books were flooding the market. So there's a lot of competition in print. And of course, with social media outlets and so forth, there's a ton of competition for both written and visual media there. Some people would call it a cascade of media noise, but there's a lot of good information there. You just got to filter it out. So to get back to the core idea, to overcome this really requires great presentation skills, including good narrative writing skills and the ability to incorporate great visuals. And even when you're doing in-person presentations. And I think one of the challenges for people of my age range, which is nearing, I can see retirement years from here, is to not try and compete with AI tool sets. A lot of us are kind of nervous about that. A lot of my colleagues are using them. A lot of my younger colleagues, surprisingly, are pushing back on it, saying, "Oh, I'll never do that. That's cheating." Well, it may be, but in this competitive of a market, we're going to have to figure out a way to embrace the best of it and try and hold the line on the worst of it, because it's not going away. And I guess as a closing thought, I would just say to my colleagues at NASA, please work on your PowerPoint skills. Just a few lines of text per slide is good. Bold, simple graphics are good. Unless you're talking to a really tight core group of your colleagues, those full page 12-point font, endless lines, and huge tables aren't doing you any favors when it comes to communicating to a broader audience.
Excellent. I think those are some great takeaways. Thank you. For the general public, as about the future of AI and technology, and specifically for, I won't just say NASA, I'll say government employees, please remember PowerPoints are a tool and a visual aid. Fabulous. Meredith, we'd love to hear your closing thoughts and insights for our audience.
I do something called my Monday Marespiration. I've always been the person to try to come out even in the darkest of the storms with the sunshine. And I think for leaving some closing thoughts here, I'm going to kind of go along that. But I think in such a crazy world we have right now, and a changing world, and so many sides and so many thoughts and opinions, as important as it is to take care of ourselves, our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, we have to take care of each other. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier today, just about the importance of lifting each other up and healthy competition. And I know sometimes I hear it all the time. People think, well, I'm just one voice. I'm just one person posting something positive for 20 people that are going to write something negative on my post or say something negative back. But you know what? You're that one person that's going to make a difference, that might make one other person in the room smile, who goes home and makes their family happy, who goes out the next day and makes their work office feel that much better about themselves. So I think we need to remind ourselves that we can make the difference, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. The only person's thoughts that should matter about yourself are you, and believe that. And you've got your support groups and family and friends to help, give you that boost to remind yourself of that every day. But let's go out there and let's make this society better because we are different. And every single person on this earth is here for a different cause, for a different purpose. You know, we are blessed with every single day that we get to be here on this earth to make a difference. So we need to choose to make a better place and leave this place better than we found it. And that starts with sometimes just waking up in the morning and having a gratitude thought. And before we go to bed every night, being grateful for something and just knowing every day we have an opportunity to do something good. So let's be the positive light. Maybe let's start spreading that energy more and hopefully it'll start to catch fire. And even if it doesn't, at least you know you played your part and you're making a difference in this world that so desperately needs love and nurturing, empathy, and compassion.
Thank you so much for those closing thoughts. Graham, we'd love to hear your insight or takeaway for our audience as we close out.
Yeah, I want to start with Dacher Keltner's book, All, on the new science of everyday wonder. He writes in that book about the science of awe and how we discover awe in various places in our lives. And in the intro for the book, he speaks about the recent films Inside Out and Inside Out 2. They're children's cartoons where they're experiencing emotions as living characters inside of the mind of a young person. And one thing Dacher points out is like, amongst these emotions we have of, this anger that we feel, sadness, the joy that we feel, we also have these other emotions of wonder and awe, and they really are emotions. Wonder is that curious spark about the nature of something in the universe, something as small as, when I was a kid, I used to love pulling the caps off of Bic pens and looking at them and imagine them as little spacecraft, like popping off the front of the capsule and flying out to the cosmos. But also, you have wonder when you experience great mathematical equations, great writing, a fantastic PowerPoint presentation that was really well thought, or you see a great storyteller on the news sharing the weather with us. There are lots of ways we can find that curious spark. But then beyond the sense of wonder, the emotion of wonder is a deeper human experience of awe. And awe is something that everybody should have the right to experience. In this world, there are a lot of people who still face oppression, who lack connection, who lack access to safe drinking water, to appropriate amount of food, who are facing warfare and struggle. And it's really hard to imagine finding awe in those populations. I'm so proud of my friends who run, for instance, Earthlings Hub. They're working with orphaned and refugee children in Ukraine right now to teach them about space and exploration and science, helping them find some awe. But they also have psychologists who are there to help monitor the children's mental health and their place right now in the world as they face some grand challenges that some of us will never face. And so I think when we together start thinking about these larger emotional experiences, maybe these little characterizations inside of our head of wonder and awe and what they're going through, we really do need to give them more space, I think, to be part of our lives. My friend Frank White in 1987 published his book, The Overview Effect, exploring this idea that when astronauts see the Earth from the outside looking back, that he noticed in interviewing many of them that there's like a shared similarity of the kinds of things they feel from the tenuous nature of our little fragile atmosphere to the fact that we're all together, we're all unified as one civilization on this rock in space, to feelings of wanting to improve life for everyone. It's part of why I recently coined the term the Panzoic effect, applying that to astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial life. If we can imagine a universe potentially filled with other forms of life out there, and we can think about the kinds of existences they've had, and maybe even just a little bit feel inside of ourselves, not just awe, but also some empathy for their existence, I think that can come back home to us for more pro-social behaviors, more of a sense of awe and wonder at our own existence, and maybe even a little bit more empathy for each other. And so, we can view our lives as like the little day-to-day challenges and all the emails we receive and all the things that we're facing. But if we zoom out a little bit and see ourselves in that bigger picture, it might help us in the moment to feel those emotions of wonder and awe.
Excellent. Well, this has been a powerful session. Thank you all for joining me today. It's been such an honor being with you. What I
Thank
want
you.
to thank you. And today, for our audience, we had the honor of learning from these three extraordinary global change makers who truly embody the spirit of space inspired leadership. Rod, you reminded us that storytelling is more than words, it's a bridge between imagination and action. Meredith, you showed us how visibility and vulnerability can become vehicles for transformation. And Graham, you illuminated what intentional access really looks like. So each of you have shown us what it means to go from stories to systems to create awareness, build access, and lead with purpose. And I want to thank you all for joining us today and sharing your insights during our Interstellar Insight session and being part of my second book. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So as we leave this session, I invite all of our audience to carry one insight forward, something that moved you, challenged you, or gave you clarity. Maybe it's the reminder that storytelling is more than communication. It's a catalyst for change. Maybe it's the realization that being a role model doesn't require perfection, just being present. Or perhaps it's a renewed commitment to creating access in your own sphere of influence intentionally and with purpose. Whatever it is, don't wait. Take that insight and put it into motion this week. Now, this is just the beginning of our Interstellar Insight series. Over the coming sessions, we'll explore those foundational pillars of leadership, awareness, access, and action. And I look forward to you joining me. I'm Shelli Brunswick. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.